Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me to discuss increasing gender and racial diversity in senior leadership and in the boardrooms is Charlotte Laurent-Ottomane, Executive Director of 30% Coalition. Charlotte, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Thank you. Good to see you too.
Remind our viewers of the highlights for the 30% Coalition.
Sure. The 30% Coalition is a national organization, one of a kind, that works on what we call the demand side of the board diversity. We have private equity, public companies, a large group of institutional investors as members, representing 6 trillion in assets under management. And we all work to increase board diversity to influence companies to open their boardroom doors. To date, we have close to 400 companies who have appointed a woman to the board for the first time following our investor efforts.
And you've recently been talking a lot about how to diversify corporate boards. What made you focus on that now? And are you concerned that boards will appoint someone in response to pressure that may not be the best fit for the business case?
Exactly. That's my major worry today. As you know, the landscape has changed. I think since the beginning of the year, there's been a major disruption. We have racial justice issues across the country, which, are accelerating, I think, if nothing else. We have obviously a pandemic that companies are dealing with. Investors are becoming extremely impatient. And I think that this is all kind of coming together with an increased call for diversity, and today, more specifically, racial diversity on boards, in addition to gender. I think that we're going to see, a very active proxy season where investors, that impatience is going to show. Up until now, I think investors have been extremely collaborative, and I think they will continue to do so, most of them. But I think the time is running out, and I think that the environment today is fueling emotion that is going to be difficult to deal with. This morning I read that for the first time a pension fund is suing a company. And I'm not talking about a resolution, I'm about suing a company for lack of diversity. So I think that, again, this worries me that companies are just going to appoint a woman or a person of color in reaction to this without a real assessment of what has happened to their companies, what is happening on their board, and is their board capable of doing this, which will not be successful for the company or the candidate or the movement at large to increase the diversity and the effectiveness of boards.
Charlotte, I think part of the challenge is being able to have these kinds of conversations, and you have developed a primer for CEOs and the board members and the chairs to diversify their boards. Can you walk us through that a bit?
Sure. I think that the most important thing is to start the process with the board. It has to be a group consensual process where everyone is engaged. And that only happens if everyone is involved from the beginning. I think there has to be a plan. So one of the things that's happening, as I said, is that companies are saying, okay, shareholders will appoint a woman or a person of color. A month later, I don't know, people appear. I think they have to kind of go back to the beginning with a process. And a lot of companies have already done this. They're very progressive companies. And so I don't mean to preach to those that are already there, but there are so many of them that are not. Look at your governance documents. Does your bylaws and your charter support any kind of change on your board? How many directors can you have? Have you made a commitment, a public commitment to diversity, inclusive of gender, race, and ethnicity in these documents? Have you committed to the Rooney Rule? Do you have a way of eliminating board directors if need be? So the processes have to be in place before you even start, because otherwise it's not going to work. I think once that happens, and this can be done in a relatively short period of time. I'm not talking about a long process where the board meets every 2 months on this. I'm talking about convening the board in an emergency situation, if you will. The second point is bringing somebody to do a market analysis. As I said, companies, we're doing business completely different than we did 6 months ago. Is your board capable of managing that? Are they capable of providing the oversight into the practices and the products and the processes that the company needs now and going forward to make it successful and sustainable? make yourself a matrix. Your board members on one side, horizontally, the competencies that you need, and most likely, and of course include gender and race, most likely you're going to come up with some large holes. And this is a conversation that the board themselves will have, and understand that in order to be effective and in order to grow and sustain, we need this set of skills and competencies on our board. Put that matrix in your proxy. And at that point, you start looking for your diverse candidate. There are hundreds of candidates, and we've talked about this before, Jill. The problem is not the supply. The problem is getting the companies ready and the challenge to bring in the diverse candidates. And I think that if you're prepared to discuss this process you're undergoing with your investors, not only will it buy you some time, because I think they are reasonable, but it, in the end run, will make you have a better company and a better performing board.
Charlotte, if I may ask just one more question, this is also good for attracting talent as well, especially the younger generation, where ESG and diversity and inclusion is important core values for them. And if you are not clearly making that your mandate as a company, you might lose out in recruiting and even retaining some key talent to support your businesses.
Well, you'll not only lose out on talent for your business, you're going to lose out on market. One of the things that we learned last year, and you and I talked about this, was our Women of Color campaign. Women of color represent over $1 trillion in buying power. And what's happening, again, you know, back to the current situation that we're in, there's a lot of emotions, you know, going around on many different levels. And I would not be surprised to see what we actually saw several years ago, where companies are boycotted by their customer base because they do not have the necessary diversity, or because they do not have fair and equal practices for all of their employees. So this is not just a boardroom issue. This is a company issue. It's a market issue, both for young people and for all of the people in America that feel the disruption. And I go back to this lawsuit this morning. Before, individual investors were suing companies. This is the first time that a pension fund, and it's a pension fund that is in a Black neighborhood in Detroit. So most of their pensioners are Black, and they're suing the company for the lack of racial diversity. So it's widespread, and I think that it's really necessary. Having said that, I do recognize that there are some challenges for companies, and I think that we need to understand that and help as much as we can them through this process.
All right, Charlotte, appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining me on Trade Talk.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.